Good evening. This is ENCA Moneyline, your money guide. My name is Sikim Kabateli. Coming up on the show tonight. Things go from bad to worse for Eskom as the parastatal is downgraded to junk status by Moody's, but Standard & Poor's keeps this rating the same. AngloGold Ashanti is set to cut jobs as PwC confirms the bad times facing the mining industry. And today's entrepreneur makes dolls for a living. All of that and more coming up tonight. But first, your top story. 2014 was not a good year for the country's miners. The financial performance of South Africa's mining industry saw a decline this year. The industry faced falling commodity prices, worsening cost pressures, and the ever-present threat of labor unrest. PwC says uncertainty stands in the way of the country's mines contributing more to GDP.
The saying goes, it's always darkest before dawn. And South Africa's mining industry has continued to be marred with the darkness of labor unrest. This year's 5-month platinum strike is not the only recent challenge facing one of the country's biggest exports.
The industry remains under pressure from a cost perspective. Costs are high, and this is placing pressure on the margins that are being achieved by our mining companies out there. We've seen that continuing on the prior year. Impairments were again a big factor. Impairments increased by more than 100% to 49 billion over the 12-month period, which again demonstrates the difficult environment resulting from low commodity prices.
Capital expenditure is set to remain tight according to PwC's mining survey, as made evident when Lonmin announced plans to cut costs by 2 billion rand over the next 3 years. But 2015 is projected to be another tough year for mining. Amongst other things, it marks the year for compliance to the Mining Charter, which aims to empower black South Africans.
This is a year of evaluation of the mining industry as to how companies have fared over the years with regards to compliance to the Charter. From what we see being reported by mining companies have progressed rather well in complying with the Charter. All mining companies will be expected to report by March 31, 2015, and only then will we know exactly how mining companies have done.
Revenues are tight, with wages still rising by more than the average inflation rate. Shareholders are said to receive less from their investments as costs are cut. This, in turn, could see a drop in funds passed to mining companies. PwC believes beneficiation, productivity, water scarcity and long-term sustainability will be key elements to boosting the sector in the coming year.
Even more South Africans could be facing Christmas with no jobs. AngloGold Ashanti is planning to cut its staff through voluntary severance packages. In a memo sent to unions, the company admitted that it would attempt to reduce its workforce. The bullion producer is feeling the pinch of lower gold prices and rising costs. It's added that all employees may apply for termination packages starting next Tuesday. Preference is, however, given to employees above the age of 55. AngloGold Ashanti reported a sharp drop in third-quarter profits earlier this month. The company has not said how many jobs it's looking to cut. More bad news for Eskom now as Moody's downgrades the power utilities rating to junk status. More than a quarter of Eskom's capacity is out of service due to equipment breakdowns and maintenance. This and other factors have led to its credit rating downgrade to Ba1 with a stable outlook. The move will compound Eskom's problems, making borrowing more expensive. The downgrade follows Moody's cutting South Africa's credit score and the scores of 5 local banks since Thursday. Government last month promised aid to the parastatal. At the same time, Standard & Poor's has affirmed its BBB- rating of Eskom with a negative outlook. It believes government's financial assistance will stabilize the power producer. So for a look now at exactly how credit ratings agencies work and what a triple B minus means, I'm joined in studio by Roland Cooper, who is Head of Department for Credit Rating Services at the Financial Services Board. Thank you so much, Roland, for your time today, and thanks for helping us understand all of these figures and these numbers and these letters that people hear when we talk about credit ratings. Why do we need ratings agencies? What is their purpose?
Well, their purpose is very important, not only to South Africa, but for all the countries in the world that have borrowing requirements. These borrowing requirements, for example, in South Africa, are not able to be met out of the domestic market. The numbers are far too great for the domestic market. So international sources have to be used. And that's where credit ratings come into play. The international credit ratings agencies assign ratings to either the sovereign, which is the country South Africa, or to public utilities, or to corporates. And these ratings are used by investors on the international markets. And from that, together with the own work that they do, they make decisions whether to invest in issues. So, for example, a bond issue by South Africa or Eskom.
All right. So who do they rate? As you've said countries and, of course, entities like an Eskom, for example. How do they go about their ratings?
Well, their ratings involve both qualitative and quantitative assessment. They have methodologies and criteria which they employ. And those methodologies and criteria are published on their websites, and investors are able to study them to see that they cover the points that they're interested in. And based on performance, current performance and forecasts and general economic conditions, they then do some modeling, some analysis, and then they hold committees and make decisions.
So it's a long process.
It is quite a long process, but there's quite a strict timeline attached to that.
Okay, and that's important because countries wait for this and investors wait for this information so they can make their decisions based on that particular information. What do all of these ratings mean? We've got triple B minus, I think I quoted that. I also quoted BA1, which is now the junk status that Moody's is assigned to Eskom.
Well, you start off with the AAA, which is your highest credit quality, and there's not many of those in the world today, but nonetheless it's the highest credit quality. Then you go to the AA, which is a high credit quality, and the A. And once you start getting into the triple B, it's still a good credit quality to have. But when we get into the double B range, or with Moody's, the BA range, it becomes speculative. And as you go down the scale, so it becomes more speculative. So based on that, investors have an initial overview of what the assessment is of this independent rating agency, and from that, doing their own analysis, decide whether there is an opportunity or not.
And when different ratings agencies then have different ratings for a country, so Moody says one thing, S&P says something else, how do investors interpret that information?
Well, it's a bit unusual at times, but it does happen. But the investors would then fall back onto the methodologies and the criteria, and they would read the rating report which is published and establish from that the reasons for that particular rating agency's rating. And then draw their own conclusions as to why they're different. But there won't be vast differences normally, but I see, if, for example, in the Eskom rating, there is quite a difference between Moody's and Standard & Poor's and Fitch.
And what they have said. Now, what happens when they get it wrong? Because you'll remember what happened during the banking crisis, and we're looking at all of those. What were there? No jobs, no income, those kinds of mortgage securities that were really seen to be worthless later on and led to this banking crisis. So what happens when they get it wrong?
Well, we felt those effects. The whole world has felt those effects post-2008. And we still are feeling those effects. We're still struggling to get our feet firmly on the ground and to move forward, building economies, having growth. There's threats of stagflation, etc. So what happens is you basically have to ride it out and you have to take it on the chin. There have been cases where the rating agencies have been taken to court or they've been sued for negligence or whatever, but it's not always been successful. And number two, the amounts of money that need to flow are astronomical, and I doubt very much whether they could meet those commitments.
So is that the only way a country or a utility can challenge a rating?
No, in the rating process you have the committees, and prior to the publication, they would notify that entity, either the Eskom or a bank, and say, you know, we've done our work and this is the rating that we've arrived at. And if it is any different to what it is currently, there's an appeal process to that entity. And that is simply allowing that entity to, you know, correct any factual errors.
Okay.
Or secondly, bring any new information to the rating process and see if they'll reevaluate it.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for clarifying and making something so complicated as simple as possible. Thanks, Roland. Roland Cooper is Head of Department for Credit Rating Services at the Financial Services Board. Now, manufacturing in South Africa could be at a turning point. Production in September rose 8% from the same month last year. Manufacturing had dipped in August after a July strike disrupted output. The increase was mainly due to higher production in motor vehicles, which rose over 120%. Stats SA said the food and beverages segment was also a large positive contributor to the year-on-year increase. Sales in manufactured products increased by over 1.3 billion rand in the third quarter of this year. And after the break, we take a look at a social enterprise that has empowered 13 Soweto women and their families. If you're watching ENCA Moneyline, this is your Money Guide. Stay with us.